You can start.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so shall I start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. We are here in Houston with absolutely beautiful day and enjoying ourselves in the house. How is the day in Mexico City, Lourdes?
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Good morning, Benigna. Beautiful day in Mexico City, lots of sunshine.
Excellent. Well, as we have all been experiencing in these unprecedented times we are currently living, it is fascinating to me to observe how technology has become part of our daily lives. So here we are at the Baker Institute. It's a great example where rather than having meetings, we are having webinars and we are connecting with the world through technology. So that is a great new experience for many of us. And as a result of that, we have been talking about many different subjects, and particularly topics like energy and oil markets and the impact of the coronavirus in the demand destruction that is taking place worldwide and regionally, in addition to the price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and the pandemic that obviously nobody expected to be taking place. So it has been quite a challenge, and it has been a new experience. And from everything we see, it's a new world that we are facing these days. So today we are going to be looking at how is our neighbor at the south border looking at managing this unprecedented situation. I am Benigna Leiss, non-resident fellow at the Baker Institute, and I'm hosting this webinar with Dr. Lourdes Melgar, who is also a fellow at the Baker Institute, and she's joining us from Mexico City. She has a very impressive CV, and from my perspective, I have known Lourdes for a long time. The most impressive part of her career was precisely to have been the Deputy Undersecretary of Energy in the last administration for energy, and before that for electricity. So she was a key player in the energy reform in Mexico. And before that, she was involved or very closely working with the Foreign Service. But her role in the energy reform was critical. So she's going to talk to us today about how Mexico is facing the coronavirus pandemic, how is Mexico managing that, and how is managing the collapse in oil prices as well. So in that, to address that, I just want to give a couple of comments regarding what was the situation before the current government took office. President López Obrador took office in December 1st, 2018. And at that time, the energy reform had been fully implemented, and there were 111 contracts had been awarded to the private operators from around the world. And these contracts were even the good news is that despite that the president canceled the bid rounds, these contracts have remained in place, and the operators have continued to do to meet their work programs that have been approved by the regulator, the National Hydrocarbons Commission, and the investment commitments year to date are of the order of $40 billion. However, the president has rejected the concept and the interest from the private sector for him to renew the bid rounds or potential associations for Pemex with the private sector. So that is a big picture situation right now from my perspective, but Dr. Melgar will give us a presentation here where she will be reviewing in more detail what is the current situation from the energy policy perspective and the pandemic response from the government. So Lourdes, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Benigna. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Baker Institute and of course, Benigna and the Center for Energy Studies for having invited me to join this webinar. And thank you for everyone who's following this morning. So I have prepared a presentation. I'm going to go through it as fast as I can because I would like to leave enough time for discussion. So if we could have the presentation projected, thank you so much. Let's go to the first slide, please. Oops, something happened. Okay, there it is. Okay, so I don't know what's happening with the presentation. Okay. Let me begin while they put the presentation up, and we can get started so that we don't lose any time. Well, first of all, I entitled this presentation Mexico's Energy Policy in Times of COVID-19. And well, I'm going to state some very obvious facts as an introduction, and I won't go into detail because I know you know them very well. But first of all, the world is living what is usually called interesting times. I would say interesting and uncertain times, because first of all, this pandemic, the COVID-19, has basically swept the world, and it has stopped the world, which is something completely strange if you think of it, that not only here in Mexico City, but basically most of us are within our houses without being able to leave, and over 40% of the world population is in their homes right now. The one comment I would like to make is, of course, that we can see the inequalities that this represents, because the ones of us who can stay at home and can actually work from home are the privileged ones. There are people who need to go out, who don't have, who need to make their livings, and therefore don't have this option, and it's something that I think we should be aware of. So the economy has stopped, and we have seen an incredible shutdown of supply chains all over the world. And of course, this has had significant impact on oil demand. And we are seeing also an unprecedented shock in the world oil industry. And it has to do, of course, with the fact that the demand has basically collapsed, but also it has to do with the fact that we were already coming from having a supply of oil that was, needing to be contained at the end of last year. The OPEC agreement broke down in March of this year, and we began to see this war between Russia and Saudi Arabia to win market share. Today's report by the International Energy Agency says that we will have an expected decline of demand in the order of 9.3 million barrels a day year to year. And as a very first step in an effort to stabilize the market, there is a need to at least cut 15 million barrels a day. And the big risk that we're seeing right now is that inventories buildup is reaching historically high levels, and the logistics capacity is near limit. So we're basically back to an era of low oil prices with a lot of volatility going on, and I think this is going to last at least for a couple of years. But this crisis, and as we will discuss a little bit further in the presentation, this crisis is different, or the approach to this glut is different from the ones that we have had in the past. What we're seeing in terms of addressing the economic crisis, which basically analysts are talking that this crisis is probably worse than the one we faced in 2008, and probably closer to what we saw in the Great Depression, is that lessons from the past are being taken, and a lot of application of Keynesian economics, that is a lot of fiscal and monetary policies being put in place to support workers and to support businesses and make sure that people can go through this difficult period of time. Of course, in some countries, there are concerns about the rise of authoritarianism, since governments have had special powers right now to enforce people staying at home and the shutdowns of certain industries. I won't name countries, but there are some countries that do show more concerns than others, and we're seeing the strengthening of certain leaders. And well, today we're going to talk about Mexico. And what's interesting about Mexico is that with regards to this crisis, whether we're talking about the way that it is being handled on the health sector, or whether it has to do with the handling of the economy, or even with the big oil shock, Mexico is doing it the Mexican way. We are not doing things as everybody is. We are taking a different route. And, you know, there is this presidential expectation that Mexico will become a model. And the big question, of course, is this going to really help us out? Or is it, as some analysts see, a big tsunami coming our way and we're not quite ready for it? So let's go to the next slide. I don't know if we're not projecting, I guess. Well, okay, I don't see that the oh yeah, it is being projected, sorry. Okay, so the next slide. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, I think we have to have as a background what is AMLO's view on where he wants to take Mexico. Where's the President of Obrador's view of where to take Mexico? Then we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing under the pandemic, talk about what happened last week with the OPEC Plus agreement. And then we're going to talk about Pemex and about some other energy policies that Mexico could undertake. So let's go to the next slide, please. So, okay, so this is President López Obrador. For anyone who follows Mexican news, they would see that we see him basically every single day. The president starts the day with a press conference that lasts at least an hour, sometimes over 2 hours, the mañaneras. And this is very important because on every single day, the president is setting the agenda. Let's go to the next one, please. So López Obrador came to power with a very critical view of where Mexico was after what he calls the 30 years of neoliberalism. And he came with an agenda to transform Mexico. Basically, it's an agenda that is based on ideology and on his interpretation of history. So he's reasserting what we call the revolutionary creed, which is a very nationalistic view of what Mexico should be doing, of looking inwards, and it's very much the platform that the president is following. One of the things that he has shown up to now is that ideology primes pragmatism. So let me just point out some of the key elements. First of all, the president is a politician and he knows how to exert politics, and he does it on a daily basis. He has had a policy of putting the poor first, and this has meant that he has undermined a lot of the institutional arrangements that we had to provide social policy, and instead has gone through define his own social programs where basically he gives cash hands in to different groups of people, whether it's the elderly or people who who are not in school or cannot get work, or these type of specific programs. He has on the very positive side of his policies up to now is that he has been very adamant about maintaining macroeconomic stability. This is actually interesting because this is one of the issues that are being questioned right now, given the fact that in Mexico, we are not applying our counter-cyclical policies to face the upcoming economic crisis. He has also transformed the approach to security in Mexico and created a National Guard, with a whole new arrangement for the military and the police force. His policies are very much based on austerity as part of his anti-corruption policy. And this means that he has slashed the wages of most of public employees who cannot earn more than him, and his pay, he basically gave himself a half check cut. And he basically dismissed many of the public officials, which is a challenge now, because to face a crisis like this, you need people who are technically savvy about what's going on. And in terms of energy, the main two elements of his approach to energy is, first of all, to underline energy sovereignty. So we're not talking any longer in Mexico about energy security, we're talking about energy sovereignty, which means that Mexico should produce and consume its own resources. And this, of course, implies a very significant change in the way that we define energy policy. And the prime motor of this transformation is the oil sector and basically Pemex. There is a whole view and a whole narrative about the rescue of Pemex. Can we go to the next one, please? So, next slide, please. So, in this narrative, Benigna already mentioned a little bit about the energy reform. Basically, my view is that the energy reform is basically dead in Mexico. Even though the president has maintained the reform legally and he has committed not to change any laws prior to 2021, the reality of things is that the oil bids have been canceled, the electricity auctions also have been canceled, the regulatory bodies have been undermined, have been weakened, and also bylaws and regulations that are fundamental to ensure that there is a creation of a market had been changed, have been amended. CFE is working very hard at becoming again a monopoly, blocking all competitors, using old tactics and new tactics. There is no longer interest in using natural gas, and this is actually, from my point of view, a tragedy, because Mexico, as you know, developed a broad network of pipelines under the past administration to be able to import natural gas from Texas, and the cheapest the cheapest natural gas in the world, and we have the pipelines, but we're basically not using them as we should. Also, no interest in developing renewables. So again, the renewable, as much as we gained under the past administration in terms of developing solar, geothermal, and wind is basically being stalled. And the center of this whole thing is, again, energy sovereignty. Pemex at the heart of everything. And there are three big projects that the president has. And one of them is in the energy sector. And this big project is the construction of the Dos Bocas refinery, a refinery that has been highly questioned, not only because of the huge investment that it implies. It originally was going to be below $8 billion. Now people are talking that the cost of it will be around 12 or 14 billion. The big question about whether or not it makes sense to have a refinery. Mexico has not proven to be the best at refining. We have 6 refineries that are performing under 40% of its capacity. And of course, there is the whole issue about what kind of oil we're going to be processing and all of that. So this is the biggest project in addition to the 2 other ones, which is building a new airport after he canceled the airport that was already built on 30% of it was already built in Mexico City. And the other project is building a train, a Mayan train, to go through the Yucatan Peninsula. So 3 big projects that are highly questioned, but that are at the heart of the president. So please, let's go to the next slide. So, okay, so this is the map that the Ministry of Health presented yesterday about the number of COVID cases in Mexico. Now I should point that you can see in red on the corner here that we have 5,399 confirmed cases. To get really an estimate of how many people have the virus in Mexico, you need to multiply it by 8 because of the type of approach that the Mexican government is taking to calculate how many people have the disease. I think it's important to look at this, and I wanted to mention it. I'm not going to get into health policy or anything like that, but just the kind of approach and the way our president has dealt with it. For weeks, basically, he denied that Mexico was at risk of being part of this pandemic. He stressed that people should continue their lives as is, that we should go out, that we should eat out, and basically he even claimed that Mexicans had like a special, gene that could prevent the infection from this disease. There were also arguments, perhaps not directly from the president, but that came out from different parts, arguing that this was a rich people disease, that the people who came from traveling and all of that were the ones that were bringing this illness. And basically Mexico has not been prepared for what is coming our way, or perhaps is ill prepared. So in the midst of this, we have a health crisis that we're already beginning to see in some parts of the country, like in Tijuana, in Baja California, where hospitals have a lot of challenges. The health system is suffering because of the massive budget cuts that they've received. And in the midst of this, and the fact that health authorities have enforced a program for people to stay at home, and for most factories, except for strategic ones, to close, there is no countercyclical policies to help Mexican society. As a matter of fact, this month, by April 30th, we have to pay our yearly taxes, and we don't have, it has not been delayed. Everybody has to pay because the government is expecting that everybody does what needs to be done. There's no support for SMEs. So a lot of concern in the midst of this health crisis about what is going to happen with the Mexican economy, with all the businesses, all the small businesses that are closed, and all the people who are going to be laid out. So let me go to the next one. So in the midst of this, if it wasn't bad enough to have a health crisis and economic crisis, then we get this absolute collapse of oil prices. And it was very interesting because it was not something that Mexican society was quite aware of the fact that there was this war between the Russians and the Saudis for market share. And all of a sudden last week, this topic became what we call the telenovela. It was everybody was following it as much as we were following the other telenovela, which is the daily reports from our health czar. And basically, I want to about what happened. Can we go to the next one? Oh, just before we take this one, I wanted to show this picture because this picture is it's historical in the sense that this is the OPEC Plus meeting that we had last week. And usually the OPEC meetings are closed door meetings, very, nothing comes out of them. But now we got to see this, which is, also really surprising about the ways we are connecting and the ways we are being able to talk to ourselves. So in the middle, if you go in the middle column and the top two, in the bottom two, you can see the Secretary of Energy of Mexico, Ms. Nale, and of course, all the other participants at this OPEC meeting. We came to know what was happening at the meeting because of information that started coming through Twitter from reporters and analysts based in the Middle East and mostly in Riyadh. And for those of us who have followed this and who have, I happen in my personally, I was part of the Mexican team that negotiated the stabilization of the Mexican of the oil market in the 1990s, 1998, 2000. So I've been to the OPEC meetings and to this type of meetings several times. And usually when there is information that starts to be leaked, somebody is interested in leaking it. So I'm going to talk about what I believe happened based on my previous understanding and my knowledge of this type of negotiations. And basically what I think is that the Saudis started getting really frustrated with Mexican position and began to leak this information. And so let's go back to understand what the objective of this meeting was. Basically, the objective of this meeting was to reduce 10 million barrels a day from the market with a contribution from each of the participants, OPEC plus the other players, of 23% of their production, taking originally as a base the production of October 2019. The issue was that Mexico first stated that, and of course I'm saying hearsay, I wasn't there, I'm just reporting what the media reported. It's difficult to know what actually happened inside, but this is what the media informed. So Mexico originally was proposing to do its cut from a platform of 1.9 million barrels a day. Of course, this was completely unacceptable because everybody knew that Mexico was not producing 1.9 million barrels a day in October of last year. So then after a series of tensions and a conversation that lasted, according to the media, more than 5 hours, Mexico came back with the proposal of cutting only 100,000 barrels from the 4,000 barrels that had been requested by OPEC. These created a lot of tensions within the discussion, particularly with the Saudis, because part of the reason why Russia and Saudi Arabia went into this oil war was because they were sick and tired of the free riders, and in particular seeing as free riders the United States. So they wanted everybody to contribute to the effort, and they needed everybody within this conversation to contribute in the same manner, because if there was an exception for Mexico, then there would have to be exceptions for other ones. I think part of what made the conversation so difficult is the fact that both the current Minister of Petroleum of Saudi Arabia and the Minister of Energy of Russia both knew Mexico and had seen how Mexico had helped to move forward oil agreements in 1998-2000. At that time, in 1998-2000, Mexico was really a key player in reaching agreements, bringing to the table not only OPEC, but also Norway and of course Mexico in an agreement where there was a commitment to really put, really cut what you were committing to, having transparency and complying. And so I think there was an expectation that something like that would happen, and not that Mexico would be the voice that would dissent. What is interesting, and can we go to the next slide, please? I will go very fast over this because of time, and if you want, we can come back later. But I think what is important about this, what happened last week, for me, we see a real change in geopolitics in the oil sector. Why? Because the big broker of this negotiation in the end was President Trump. On Friday, the conversations stopped when Mexico basically left the table and basically said, I cannot commit more than 100,000 barrels a day of the cut. And basically Saudi Arabia was being really tough about, you need to commit full, the full 400K. What happened then is a series of negotiations at the highest level where President Trump had conversations with the Saudis, the Russians, and with President López Obrador. And this is completely unusual because, as you know, the United States has never been in favor of cartels, especially from a official position. And here it was the US president doing these negotiations. And finally, on Sunday morning, which happened to be Eastern Sunday, the president of Mexico announced that he had a deal with the president of the United States and that the United States was going to cut 300K for Mexico. So of course, everybody in Mexico is wondering what it is that Mexico is going to have to pay the US for these 300,000 barrels. Basically on Sunday, an agreement was reached within OPEC of a reduction of 9.7 million barrels a day instead of the original 10 million, with Mexico cutting 100,000 barrels from its production, and so there was an agreement. Couple of things. I think part of the reason the Saudis agreed to this is because they were getting a lot of pressure from the US, not only from President Trump. We saw also some Republican senators threatening to take away some of the military support that they give Saudi Arabia. So there are a lot of high-level politics going on right there. But the thing is that this in Mexico, it was called a claim of victory. And we went back to our reality. So let's go to the next slide, please. So our reality is that our president, even in the midst of this whole crisis, is giving a priority to Pemex. We are really in the make Pemex great again scenario, Pemex first. And this means that the first thing that the president has reasserted is that we will continue building this refinery. Okay, even under the current oil prices, we will continue building a refinery. So let's go to the next slide, please. So let's take a little look at where we are. So first of all, we are really caught in this idea that Pemex will be the motor of Mexican development. And whereas this could have been the case at some other point in our history, it certainly is not the case right now. Why? Because Mexican economy is not petrolized. Mexican economy, our dependence on the oil sector is more or less similar to the one you have in the US. It's about 8–9% of our GDP. The other thing is that, yeah, public finances are still dependent on oil, but they are not as dependent as they were in the past. Last year, there were about 15% of government revenue the budget came from oil revenues. And the other thing is, so in this context, it may not make sense, but the president has this oil view of how things should work. And so his priority right now is that no matter what, Mexico should keep its target of producing 2 million barrels a day by the end of the year. And this is why Secretary Nalia had such a hard time at that meeting. She would not agree to a cut. it's very interesting because in the past, Mexico never has agreed to cut production. In the late 90s, we agreed to cut exports. And in 2016, when we participated in these agreements, we basically joined the commitment by making a commitment not to increase production. So something happened in there, but basically the key point is our president thinks that Mexico can continue to go with business as usual, even under this current scenario. And that is really surprising. The other thing that also the president has a view that we should reduce our exports, and this is something that is already projected in the criteria for next year's budget that the Ministry of Finance has presented, and that we should basically refine all our oil and use it internally. This is really bad news for the energy sector, for the electricity sector, because there is a view that we should be using again fuel oil for our plants, for our generation plants, which not only are highly polluting, but also are more expensive than using cheap natural gas or renewables. We have a huge problem with logistics because we don't have where to put away all this fuel oil, which is of course very low quality, has a lot of sulfur and cannot be sold in the market any longer. So big issue there. An attitude that Pemex does not have to revise its budget, which is really baffling analysts, because we know that at current prices, basically many of the projects that Pemex has are basically not competitive. And we still have, and it keeps maintaining, and it even strengthens some of the red flags, which is we have a declining production. Yes, there are signs that there have been small increases, but we still have declining proven reserves. Probably we'll see CNH is going to announce proven reserves by the end of the month. Probably we'll see a better data, but as you know, with current oil prices, the next proven reserves should go down. The debt of Pemex is very high, is 2x the value of its assets. It is heavily taxed, still heavily taxed. The government has issued policy to give them a little bit of leeway, but it's still there. And we still have a situation where the one that is making the money in Pemex is exploration and production, but still costs are high. The average is around $15 a barrel, which is actually lower than, about the same level that the current price of the Mexican mix. And industrial transformation, mostly refining, is an area where we have a lot of losses. So it's quite surprising that there is no, all the other oil companies are doing, basically redefining their business plan on their current situation. Let's go to the next one. So this situation is doesn't look very, very good, but I would like to pose that Mexico can have an alternative future. And Benigna was saying it's really incredible how right now we can communicate, we can have this webinar. I'm in Mexico City, many of you are in different parts of the world connected, and we're having this conversation. This is the future. The future is really the electrification of things, the digitalization, the Internet of Things. And Mexico should really be thinking about moving towards the future and not moving back into the past. So let's go to the next one, please. So first of all, I pose that Mexico should really use natural gas as a transition fuel. Right now, we should really take advantage that we're still the privileged one that can import really cheap natural gas from the US. They actually almost pay you in Oaxaca, they pay you to take it away. We should develop our clean energies. If we're talking about energy sovereignty, what better energy sovereignty for Mexico than to generate its renewable energies? And we have a lot of potential, not only solar, wind, and geothermal, but also eventually wave and all those new technologies that are being developed. We should really boost distributed generation, and smart grids in Mexico is something where we're really lagging behind. And of course, all of this can be done with a high requirement for local content development, which would push the development of our supply chain, generate employment, And of course, within all of these, doing it in a sustainable manner. And what do I mean by a sustainable manner? Here I mean not only the financial sustainability, but also the social and the environmental sustainability. And in the social sustainability, we know that many of these projects will be developed in regions where the social impact studies and assessments will grant benefits to the communities, and where there would be indigenous consultations to people who would benefit, having real benefits for the people, triggering local development at the ground level. Environmentally, of course, it would help much more Mexico comply with its Paris Accord commitments, rather than basically ignoring them by polluting our country with more emissions from fossil fuels. So this is some of the thoughts that I have in mind. Of course, this is perhaps utopia, because the current government is more interested in the fourth transformation than in the fourth industrial revolution. And it would be really a pity that Mexico is basically stays behind. So thank you very much for your attention, and I am open for your questions. I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you, Benigna.
Okay, can you hear me now? Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. You have given us a very interesting and a little disturbing view of what is going on in Mexico these days. So we have several questions here, and one of them is precisely the role of how can Mexico at this time justify the refinery that is estimated cost of $8 billion when to build this refinery, when actually here in the Gulf of Mexico, a refinery for a similar size was sold for actually for it was $500 million. So what is your assessment of that, I guess, that situation?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, I don't have the answer. I think this is something you would have to ask the Mexican government. And it's certainly a question that we ask because it doesn't make sense that right now where the limited resources our government has should be spent in the health of the people and in the reactivation, we put money into the refinery. This is a political statement. And the one thing I can tell you is that past Monday, just after we had the closing of the OPEC meeting, the first thing the Secretary of Energy did was give us a report about the advancements of the construction of the refinery. So the government is not backing up, regardless of the fact that it does not make any rational economic sense.
So the construction is going on, and in terms of the measures that the government is taking to control the COVID-19, what is the number of actual deaths in the country? That's another question that received.
I don't have the answer to that question other than the official numbers that I showed from yesterday. I think it was 400 and something. People in Mexico are questioning that people who have had influenza, they're saying that instead of having COVID, that they have some sort of influenza. And so some people have died from that, but it's very hard to tell. And we're also seeing reports that are differ between what the federal government is reporting state by state to what the states are reporting. So this is one of those issues where people are feeling frustrated, because we know that Dr. López-Gatell, who is the health czar of Mexico, is a very knowledgeable and well-respected person. And he knows that it makes sense to give all the information, but for some reason, there is this idea that, we should have a different way of reporting than others do.
Okay, and going back to the negotiations or the participation of Mexico in the OPEC meetings, and there are also a couple of questions there regarding the strategy that Mexico, that I think you explained to some extent, but also what is the role of the hedging that Pemex and the government maintains they have for the $49 per barrel that they assume in their budget. What is the role of that situation?
Okay.
Does it have an
was
impact?
one of, okay, yes, this was one of the arguments that people made over the weekend, saying, well, Mexico cannot commit because of the hedging. Or that Mexico could be tough because of the hedging. Certainly the hedging gives Mexico flexibility that other countries that don't have the hedging, they don't have. I mean, we are, let's say, protected for a certain amount of our production, our exports, up to a price level that is $49 a barrel. So the budget, the price of the Mexican mix in the current budget is $55 a barrel. So $49 will be compensated. And I think, this year will be a very good year to have had the hedge. Now, I'm not an expert on hedges, but I would pose that if you're using hedge for these type of negotiations, basically what you're doing is you're increasing very much the price of your future hedges. So I think it's something that it wouldn't make much sense. It certainly gives us a breath to have a short-term view of things, but we really need a long-term view, because I think this oil glut is going to last a while.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I think that we have actually got to the end of our time here with a wonderful presentation from you, and I think we have answered the critical questions we got. So thank you very, very much for your participation. And if you have some final comments, it would be great to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much. I just would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. I think this is the beginning of a new era. And of course, in terms of Mexico, we will need to think a lot hard about how to make sure things move forward. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. And one question that just came in, and I don't want to say that I didn't address it, is the role of the, how do you think the rating agencies are going to be looking at Mexico and Pemex after this whole situation we have been experiencing recently?
Well, that's one of the risks that Mexico is running with maintaining these policies. Really going against what every other country is doing in terms of its economy, but particularly with regards to Pemex. As we know, there have already been downgrades of both Mexico and of particularly of Pemex. So yes, there are risks there, and I wouldn't want to talk for the agencies. Let's wait and see what they think, but I definitely think that there is a red flag there.
Well, thank you again, and thank you to everybody who participated in this webinar. As I said at the beginning, this is going to be our new way to connect with the world around us. So thank you so much, and have a great day, and enjoy the beautiful day, the people who are in Houston and in Mexico City. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.